Hi there. In the last video we discussed the threat posed by foreign fighters. And in this video we will explore some policy options to deal with this phenomenon. What can the world do about the threat posed by foreign fighters? Well, in week 4 of the course we discussed the need and opportunities and also the obstacles of a holistic or comprehensive approach. And we came to the conclusion that it's easier said than done. Well, that might be true, but looking at the situation in Syria, Iraq and elsewhere, doing nothing is not an option. We have to do something. We have to learn very quickly to deal with the threat posed by foreign fighters and other groups in these areas. We need an answer. Doing nothing is not an option. And in this video we would like to see if the UN strategy could serve as a guideline. Well, what does that UN strategy look like? What measures does it consist of? Well, basically 4 types. The first type of measures are measures to address the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. And the second set of measures are measures to prevent and combat terrorism. The third category are measures to build states' capacity to prevent and combat terrorism and to strengthen the role of the UN system in this regard. And finally, it consists of a set of measures to ensure respect for human rights for all and the rule of law as the fundamental basis of the fight against terrorism. Let us have a look at each of these categories. The first category, measures to deal with the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. What does the UN document say about this? Well, they have a long list of individual measures, and I think these 3 are among the most important ones. First, to promote dialogue and tolerance and prevent defamation of religion, religious values, beliefs and cultures. Well, that's very important. In the previous video I mentioned the indirect impact of foreign fighters and what's happening in Syria and Iraq on intra and interfaith relations. Also linked it to what some believe to be a clash of civilizations, the anti-Muslim feelings. And we have to be careful about that. And measures to promote dialogue and debate and tolerance might help to limit that impact. Then the second issue, to ensure for realization of the development goals, including the Millennium Development Goals. And they relate to poverty, health, larger issues like that, socio-economic issues. Well, in week 3 we discussed the link between poverty and terrorism, and I believe there's no direct link, but the UN thinks that these larger conditions, which relate to health, education and poverty, there is a link with terrorism, and they believe that in the long run it might lead to less terrorism. But it's not a short-term measure. Then to scale up cooperation and assistance in the field of rule of law, human rights and good governance. And I think the latter is very important, the good governance element. We should do more about that. If you look at the Arab Spring, Arab Uprising, Arab Awakening in many of these countries, they were related to a lack of good governance, if you could say that. And also in Syria, the Syrian uprising is linked to that. And if we could do more about good governance in many of these countries to deal with corruption, etc., that in the long run might have an impact as well, lead to less terrorism. Then measures to prevent and combat terrorism. 4 issues stand out. Refrain from facilitating and financing or tolerating terrorist activities. Well, especially the financing part is important. Many believe that IS got a lot of support from a number of countries and a number of individuals in the past, and that made it possible for this organization to grow and become very strong. And recently a lot of policymakers and governments have said we have to stop this, and that could even have an impact on the medium term. Then to ensure that territories are not used for terrorism training camps or the preparation of terrorism acts. Well, of course, that makes a lot of sense, and if we could do more about that, that could even have a short-term impact. Then to ensure the apprehension and prosecution or extradition of perpetrators of terrorist acts. So apprehension and extradition. Well, I believe that's very relevant in the case of foreign fighters. Many of them, of course, don't fly directly into Syria or Iraq, but cross many different borders, also that of neighboring countries. These neighboring countries face a lot of troubles with refugees, but they might or they could do more in apprehending foreign fighters, preventing them to cross the border into Syria and extradite them to their countries of origin. Again, it's also easier said than done, but more is needed in this field. And then finally, to combat illicit arms trades, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, we have to do more about that. Again, that could have even a short-term or medium-term impact. Then measures to build state capacity and to measures that relate to the role of the UN. Well, to contribute to the capacity building programs in the area of port and civil aviation security is an interesting measure, especially in relation to civil aviation security. In the last months and last year, groups like Islamic State and other groups have again threatened the airline industry, which worries a lot of people that fly, and more could be done to improve security. Perhaps not in a number of countries, but in some other countries we could do more to make that even safer. And then to encourage frequent exchanges of information and technical assistance among bodies dealing with counterterrorism. A lot could be learned from, different countries can learn a lot from each other. Best practices, but also worst practices. And the best way to learn is not to find out yourself what you do wrong or what is successful, but to sit around a table and to share ideas, experience, etc. That could have some impact on the medium term. And then to cooperate with other organizations such as the World Bank, think of money laundering and terrorism financing, and the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Then the final category, the measures to ensure respect for human rights and the rule of law. Well, some of the measures mentioned or the issues mentioned in the UN strategy are, you could say, a good advice to governments to make sure that there's effective counterterrorism policy, but that these counterterrorism measures and the protection of human rights are not conflicting goals, but complementary and mutually enforcing. They go hand in hand. It's not human rights or security, but they have to, they are one of the same. You cannot have a lot of security while not respecting the human rights. And then counterterrorism measures need to comply with international law. And a final point I would like to make, perpetrators have to be brought to justice. And I think if we see the images, the horrible images in Syria and Iraq and many other parts of the world, I think the family of the victims and the victims themselves need to know and be sure about the idea that the perpetrators will be brought to justice. How to translate these ideas into concrete measures and to implement them effectively? Well, this is difficult. And takes us back to week 4 where we discussed the pros and cons, the possibilities and obstacles to a comprehensive or holistic approach. And we said it's easier said than done. And this is also the case with regard to the UN strategy. But nonetheless, it's highly valuable for a long-term approach. But in the short term, it will not stop the fighting. And it will not immediately stop the flow of foreign fighters going to Syria and Iraq. Today, the military option is the predominant one, and also that will not bring dissolution. It might have an impact on the short term, but it will not be dissolution. Ideally, we would find a proper mix between short-term measures and long-term measures that also focus on the conditions that led to the rise of groups like Islamic State, Jabhat al-Nusra, and other groups. To sum up, there are several theoretical options to deal with foreign fighters. And the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy lists a number of these measures in 4 different categories. But the problem of these measures is that they mainly relate to the medium and long run. And in the short run, there are fewer options. And this means that we should not expect any solution soon. And as many have already indicated, the situation in Syria and Iraq will not be solved in a few months' time. It will take years, unfortunately.